Hello, everybody. Welcome to Recreational Drugs. We got 28 out of 50. Let's see what I can tease while we're waiting. Kaylee Quackenbush. Hello. Just looking to see who's here today. Looks like all the cool people showed up. Chat here. Brian Jacobson says hello to everyone. Can everyone please say hello to Brian Jacobson? Nice kid. There we go. Nice. Okay, so I guess you've heard me say this before, but you know, we're not going to be talking for an hour and 15 minutes today like we used to. Like when we're in class, I mean, because it's just nobody asks questions and it's kind of easy just to keep going and going and going. So today's lecture will probably be half an hour, 45 minutes. Hopefully you guys are reading the book as well as listening to me talk, because that's really important too, especially if you're not doing well. But anyway, while we're all here, let's go ahead and talk about some drugs. Gus, knocking my computer over. Okay, opiates. As you know or don't know, opiates all derive from the natural products found in poppies. So here's a field of poppies, lovely flowers, the poppies. You probably saw the, I hope anyway, you've seen the cultural touchstone Wizard of Oz. They're almost at Oz and they start to run, but the witch makes poppies grow all around them and they fall asleep in the poppy field. So that's kind of a takeoff on the fact that opium from poppies caused you to fall asleep. And then it rains and they wake up. I'm not sure why raining makes it go away, but in this case it does. Okay. Oops. So back in the day, as we say, sorry, I'm not as up on this as I should be. To just get a chat. Chat. It seems like when I'm in share mode, I can't read my chats. Kyle Lofton, can you read that chat to me if it's important, if it's a question? If it's just a hi, Brian, we can skip it. But if there's a question,
it's I wrote in the Wizard of Oz. It snows and it kills the poppies. That's why.
Oh, it snows, so it's like a frost, and the poppies are dead. And
yeah.
I see. Okay, and that's why the Good Witch from the north, snowy area, is the one who saved them, I guess. Okay, so anyway, here's the poppy. So what they do is wait until the poppy's gone past the flowering stage and into the bud, into the kind of seed pod phase. And when you cut the outside of the seed pod, this juice leaks out, thick, kind of syrupy juice, and they collect that up. And that is opium. They let it dry, and that's opium. So you can smoke that, you can eat it, anything you want. There's, I think, 3 different opiates in it, or opiates in it. Morphine, codeine, and another one whose name I can never remember because it's not that important in terms of pharmacology. But back in the day, you know, before this drug's been known of forever. So at least since the 17th century. but probably, depending on the part of the world, pretty much always known, just like marijuana. Um, but came to the Western world in probably the 18th century. And, before the 1920s, nothing was illegal. You could sell anything in the store. So here you could buy heroin in the store. Paregoric and laudanum are both opium that's been dissolved in ethanol. So you just take a few drops of it in a glass of water and drink it down. Heroin, people realized after a while, like once people started injecting morphine with a needle, they found out it was addictive, and also people who smoked it would get addicted to it as well. So the good people at Bayer Pharmaceutical came up with heroin, and it was heroic because it got people off their morphine addiction. Of course, now they're addicted to heroin, but it did get them off the morphine, which I guess was a good thing. So heroin, we'll talk about the difference between morphine and heroin shortly, and it's not a big difference in terms of chemical structure, but basically you take that opium and you treat it, and and convert it into heroin. This is black tar heroin, so it's just like the full opium gunk, which has got all kinds of chemicals in it, not just morphine, but a lot of stuff in there. And you convert the morphine in it into heroin, and now you've got this big black gunk. And this stuff people can inject into their arms, but it's pretty nasty stuff. You take that and you extract the heroin from it, and you get purified heroin. So this is like 100% heroin. Okay, so how is this drug taken? Well, let me see if I'm just checking my notes over to make sure I didn't forget about something. So basically there are three different kind of types of opiate that I'll be talking about, and based on their absorption principles, because that affects their uses and their addiction potential. So I'll be talking about three different ones, and then also the antagonists we'll talk about. Okay, so in terms of pharmacokinetics, opium is classically either smoken or eaten. Like I said, heroin is non-polar. It will absorb through mucous membrane, so you can snort it, you can eat it. I think you can smoke it, but in the end, usually people end up injecting it because it's a fast way to get it in. So oral is your slowest way to take a drug. And injection is a very rapid way. And the big difference is the rush. How fast it gets into your brain will determine how much of a peak of euphoria you get at the beginning of the drug effect. Here's some people who are injecting. You can see all these like infections, basically, is what they are, all over the arm. So the thing is, like the heroin itself isn't causing this. What it is because they're buying it on the street, and it's all contaminated with all kinds of junk as well as bacteria and viruses, and they inject it with dirty needles under their skin, and so they get a lot of infections from that. So that's one of the biggest dangers from this. If you've ever seen the movie Requiem for a Dream, the guy loses his arm because he gets an infection in his arm from all the injection, and ends up one arm short. And they called him a lefty after that. But eventually what happens is if you keep injecting your veins, every time you inject the vein, you get a little bit of scar tissue there. And every time you inject, you build up more scar tissue. So if you're constantly injecting yourself in the same spot over and over again, and I don't mean like when the doctor takes blood from your body once every year to check it, but I mean every single day you're poking it 4 or 5 times. In that area, there gets to be so much scar tissue that it closes the vein off, and then blood can't go through it. So then the vein collapses because there's no blood in it anymore, and then you can't inject in that vein anymore. So you got to go find another vein and another vein and another vein until they all start to collapse. So after your arm veins are no good anymore, people will inject themselves in the leg, inject in the neck. Usually you have someone else doing your neck. Eventually they'll poke it in their eye, like anything they can do to get it in. Because, with that, when that addiction hits them, and they go into withdrawal, they'll do whatever it takes to get it in their system. So they don't care. It's no longer. It's preferable to poke yourself in the eye than to be junk sick. So they'll do whatever it takes to get it in. Distribution. Now, distribution is really important for these drugs because of their addiction potential. So the rate of crossing the blood-brain barrier is methadone is the slowest, morphine's next, then heroin, then fentanyl, and then probably carfentanil. But the only ones I'm talking about today will be fentanyl, heroin, morphine, and methadone a little bit. So basically, these are all full agonists at that receptor, so they all pretty much have the same effect when they get in your brain. Big difference is this is going to get into your brain really fast because it's very nonpolar. Heroin's going to go in a little slower than that, but still pretty damn quick. Morphine goes in slower yet, and then methadone goes in really slowly. So that's going to affect, well, let's see, wait, before I say that, let's say, here's why. Okay, here's morphine. So you've got these two big OH groups over here, which make it somewhat polar. And also this nitrogen over here can be protonated. So that puts a positive charge on it, which makes it very polar. So, and that nitrogen coming on here is close to the Ka of that is close to the pH of blood. The Ka was probably about, I don't know, I'm not going to make a number up, but at blood pH, 85% of the morphine is in the charged form, the polar form that can't get into your brain. So only 15% of it can actually get into your brain. Over here, heroin, you put an acetyl group on each of those OHs, and now because it's electron releasing, that becomes less of an issue because you no longer charge this nitrogen up as easily. So most of it is in the uncharged form, and so it gets in your brain a lot easier. And then once it gets into your brain, it gets converted into morphine. Heroin itself doesn't affect opiate receptors, but this is just a little ester bond here. There are esterases in your blood and in your brain and everywhere. So those enzymes will take those esters off, and then it's morphine in your brain. Fentanyl, being a totally synthetic opiate, looks nothing like morphine or heroin. So this is another kind of classification you'll see with opiates, opioids. So opiates are like morphine, which is the natural product, and then they call this semi-synthetic because it's not natural, but there's not a whole lot of change to it. You're changing the natural drug, and it becomes semi-synthetic. And then fentanyl is totally synthetic. This is just synthesized. And, structurally it doesn't look anything like the others, but has the same effect, I guess. I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell why for me anyway. But let's look at this animation. Hang on a second. Okay, so this animation, if you have the online version of the book, this animation's in there. This is how it gets into your brain, how morphine partitions into your brain slowly because of its charged nature. So here is morphine, it's charged, so it can't get through that blood-brain barrier. But then when that hydrogen comes off, now it's not polar and or less polar and can get into your brain. So if you look at it, and that's when you look at it in terms of just one molecule. If you look at it in terms of all the molecules in your bloodstream when you take an injection of morphine, most of them are going to be charged and can't get through, right? But every now and then, hang on, pause. So you can't really see it, I guess, in this animation, but the idea was these are the charged ones and they can't get through. These are the uncharged ones and they can. So as one uncharged molecule comes over, just by mass action, Le Chatelier's principle, good old Chem 101 or 111. When one of these non-polar ones goes in, one of the polar ones gets deprotonated and replaces it. And then another one goes through and another deprotonates. So this is how it gets through. Like 15% of the drug at any one particular time can go into the blood-brain barrier. And as it goes into your brain, more of it that's in your blood gets converted into the non-polar form, and that goes into the brain. So that's a slow process because only 15% can get in your brain at any one particular time. Heroin, 100% could get in. So as soon as you inject it into your bloodstream, when it goes to your brain, it all can go into your brain. So what happens when it gets there, though, is the topic of my next animation. Okay, so here's heroin in the brain. Heroin goes into the brain. These acetate groups come off, and now it's morphine. And now it can't get back out as easily, right? Because it has a hard time crossing that blood-brain barrier, and it activates your opiate receptors. So that's heroin.
Dr. Slish, there's a question in the chat.
Let me see if I'm going to stop the share. Can you predict the function of a drug based on its chemical structure, like the effects? Yes, you can, often, not always. You can make predictions. You really have to check it out empirically to make sure. But for example, if you look at like amphetamines, we'll talk about in the next chapter. Similar to this, it's like you take the natural endogenous agonist norepinephrine, you change the structure a little bit. Now it looks a lot like norepinephrine, and it turns out it affects norepinephrine in the brain. So that's one way of looking at it. But also, today, they can take computer programs and look at the structure of something, predict its actual structure in the solution, and then they can predict whether it's going to bind to different receptors or not. But again, in the end, you always have to test it in the actual biological system to know if it's going to work. But yes, you can do some predictions based on the drug structure. Okay. Let's go back to this. Okay, distribution. So this is why that's important, that movement across the membrane. So here is fentanyl, the most non-polar one, and after injection, it goes boom, right into the brain really fast. Heroin's a little bit slower, morphine's slower yet, and methadone is very slow. So it takes hours for it to peak in your brain. And why is that important? I'm glad you asked. That is important because, hang on a second. That's what's going to affect that peak rush. So if you remember when we talked about in chapter 5 about addiction, I was talking about how when you take a drug that produces euphoria, it goes in and you get a peak of euphoria, and then your anti-reward system kicks in and it comes back down, and then you're at this mellow, happy place. Well, the faster it gets in, the faster you activate the euphoria, and then your anti-reward is going to be delayed behind that. So if you look at morphine, kind of as it's coming in and peaking, you're already getting some anti-reward, so the peak's a little bit lower than it would have been if there was no anti-reward. With heroin, it gets a lot higher before it starts to be brought back down. And fentanyl, it goes really high before the anti-reward kicks in and brings it down a bit. So that rush is basically euphoria from dopamine in your nucleus accumbens. And that's what makes fentanyl a lot more addictive than heroin and more addictive than morphine, because it's the rush really that is the addiction, right? That's your nucleus accumbens effect, and that's where your addiction comes from. So see. Fentanyl peaks in like seconds in your brain, heroin in 1 to 2 minutes, morphine in about 5 minutes, methadone in hours. So the faster it peaks, the greater the rush and the greater the addiction potential. Oral administration is going to take longer, 30 to 60 minutes. And especially if you take morphine via the oral route, which is the way they give it to you, you really won't get a rush from it. All it does is activate your receptors so you don't go into withdrawal, but without giving you the peak that the addiction gives you. Okay, metabolism and elimination. So this is kind of important too. Let's see if I have it here. Okay, so all the opiates, so I'm just talking about heroin, morphine, and fentanyl here, but I'm going to throw on top of this oxycodone. So oxycodone is, I believe, Vicodin. Used to be used an awful lot for pain management. I think it still is, although they're being really more careful with their opiates than they used to be. But oxycodone will last about 4 hours. So you take a pill every 4 hours. So what happens is when you take repeated doses that are a little bit closer than the half-life of it. So when you take the pill, it doesn't come all the way down to 0 before you take your next pill. It comes up and it comes almost down and you take your next pill. So then you go up higher. I can show you here. So it's not quite out of your system. You take another pill, it goes higher and down to here as it goes away and up to here until it goes away. And then you reach a state eventually where you're constantly fluctuating over some peak and down to some valley. So doctors will take advantage of this because they want you to be right about here. So they'll give you a dose. So after several doses, you'll be back up in the therapeutic range, and they'll say, well, you're right about here, and that's what we want. Sometimes if it's really important to get you up to therapeutic range fast, they'll give you a high dose for the first one, and then these doses. So that's called a loading dose, quick loading dose, and then you're down to here. But anyway, the problem here with oxycodone, taking a pill every 4 hours, is you're getting these peaks and valleys. So the peaks can represent an opportunity to get some kind of rush out of it, which makes it more addictive. And the valley is where it's not really affecting your pain as much as you want. So 1 every 4 hours is not the best way to take it. So somewhere in the 90s, they came up with OxyContin. So OxyContin is oxycodone in a controlled release formulation. So basically when they make the pill, like the drug itself is identical, but when they put the chemical in a pill, the pill is designed such that it doesn't fall apart in your stomach. It slowly falls apart as it goes down your intestinal tract. And as the pill falls apart, the drug is released. So since it's taking 12 hours for the pill to fall apart, you're getting drug delivered to your system for 12 hours. Really great way to give the drug. But because it's taking 12 hours to come out, your one OxyContin pill will have like 3 or 4 times as much oxycodone as a single oxycodone pill, right? Much higher dose, but it's coming out slowly. So you're coming up to this peak and maintaining there. And just when the first pill starts to run out, you take another pill, you get back up there. And so you're getting a much more level release of that oxycodone and a more constant blood level. And that's better therapeutically. Now, the problem with OxyContin, which a lot of people got in trouble with, was all you got to do is take that pill and grind it up. And now you've got, 4 oxycodone and you snort them and boom, that's how people got really addicted to this stuff because, they were just pills with more drug in them and they could get a really good dose and get high from it. They've reformulated it now so you can't crush the pill. If you do, it just gets mushy or something and you can't really take it that way. But anyway, that's what the difference between oxycodone and OxyContin is. Fentanyl patch, again, this is probably the best way to take a pain medicine. This is the transdermal patch. We talked about that in chapter 1, where you've got a reservoir of drug and a control membrane underneath it that only lets so much drug through it per hour or whatever. And so if you're infusing the drug at a constant rate, you will get a constant blood level. And that's the same as if you had an IV drip. It would look exactly the same. It just comes up to a level and it stays there. And this is basically the best way to take the drug because you're not getting peaks and valleys at all. Problem with the fentanyl patch is if you're someone who wants to abuse the drug, all you gotta do is rip the patch open and suck on it, and boom, you've got 3 days worth of fentanyl in your body all at once. So that can be really dangerous. And then here's your methadone. Okay, takes a long time to get into your body and reach its peak, and you're taking it once a day, so you're not getting the peaks and valleys again. So kind of the whole point of methadone is to eliminate those peaks. So you're not getting high, you're not getting really high and then really low. And so at neither the high nor the low are you able to function as a human being. So this gets you kind of in the middle somewhere. So you're able to function because you're not going into withdrawal, but you're not getting high. So you're not, on the nod somewhere, not being non-functional. So that's the difference in the pharmacokinetics of those 3 different ways of taking the drug. Okay, question. Let's stop share so I can read it. The company that makes OxyContin was just fined $8 billion. I know, isn't that fabulous? I mean, they were out there telling doctors, oh, don't worry about addiction. OxyContin's not addictive. Give them as much as you want. And also, another thing they did was they lobbied the kind of the oversight body that is like oversight over doctors, and they said, look, doctors aren't treating pain like they should. You got to make them use more opiates so they can control pain. And so they put this whole new thing. And then when you go to the doctor, you'll see this yourself. A whole new vital sign. So your vital signs are like blood pressure, temperature, things like that. And they threw a new vital sign in, which is pain level. So when you go to the doctor now, how are you feeling? Smiley face, not so smiley face, unhappy face, that pain level thing. And so, there's this doctor who teaches in some classes here, Todd Mania, maybe some of you have had him. He said, how do you measure pain? It's all subjective. So, blood pressure is objective, body temperature is objective, all these other things are objective, but pain is subjective. So, people are, you go to the doctor, oh, I'm in so much pain, doctor, please give me more. So, that's why they got fined, not because the drug was bad, but because they pushed it politically to make sure the doctors were forced to use more of it. They addicted all these people, and then, here we are years later in this huge mess. But anywho, so now we're going to click over to the mechanism of action part of our show with our mouse party. It's going to take a second. I was going to have this up and running before you came, but it has a little song goes with it. It can be a little distracting. Let's share this. By the way, at any time during this video, if you want to dance, you're welcome. Welcome to go ahead and dance. I'll be dancing. Animal abuse. Cartoon animal abuse. Hello. Oh. Oops. It's okay if I drop this guy. You can't feel it anyway.
Before heroin enters the system, inhibitory neurotransmitters are active in the synapse. These neurotransmitters inhibit dopamine from being released. When the body's natural opiates activate opiate receptors, the release of inhibitory neurotransmitters is shut down. Without inhibition, dopamine can be released.
Let me back up a second. So you can imagine this as being a neuron in the nucleus accumbens that's interacting with the inhibitory GABA neuron in the nucleus accumbens that inhibits dopamine release. We'll go over this in more detail in the next class, but this is opiate, this is GABA, this is dopamine.
When the body's natural opiates activate opiate receptors, the release of inhibitory neurotransmitters is shut down.
This is GABA,
Without inhibition,
this is dopamine,
can be released.
this is the nucleus accumbens here.
Heroin mimics natural opiates and binds to opiate receptors, turning off dopamine inhibition. Dopamine is allowed to flood the synapse, producing immediate feelings of sedation and well-being. Neurons with opiate receptors are in parts of the brain responsible for the transmission of pain signals, stress response, and emotional attachment. Our body's opiates are natural painkillers, effective when we have sustained massive injury. This is why morphine, a drug related to heroin, is used as a painkiller.
So we'll talk about parts of the brain again, but here's your medulla oblongata. That's where your respiratory centers are. When the opiate receptors are overstimulated there, you stop breathing and die. That's not good. Here's kind of the pain transmission part, the thalamus and the paraqueductal gray area. We'll talk about that. Here's your kind of dopamine area here, the nucleus accumbens and the limbic system. And then you've got your cerebral cortex, where you get that pleasant, happy feeling. That's kind of after the rush, that relaxed, happy feeling. Let's drop this guy back in. Stumble. See, he don't care. That mouse doesn't care. Okay. Stop sharing. You're sharing too much, Dr. Slush. Okay, we're almost done today, actually. I hope you've got something to do after this. Where was I? Right here. Okay. You checked my notes to make sure I didn't forget something. Did I just miss it? No, I didn't. Okay. Concur. Okay, so what are these drugs doing? They're basically mimicking endogenous opiates that you have in your brain already. So things like endorphins, you've probably heard of endorphins before. Enkephalins are similar to endorphins. Dynorphins, on the other hand, are like the opposite of endorphin. So endorphins make you feel good, and dynorphins make you feel bad. And the endorphins are involved in sexual behavior, orgasm, and that calm, relaxed feeling you get after. Pain modulation, really important. And they produce a calm, relaxed feeling. Like after you've gone for a really long run and you're a really long, stressful run, you didn't think you could finish, you did. Afterward, you feel really good. And that's because of release of endorphins. A nice hot shower will give you endorphin release too. Alcohol will release endorphins. So a lot of things will release them. What else did I want to say? Pain modulation. I can't remember what I was going to say. That's okay. Oh, injury. That's the other thing I want to talk about. So one of the major roles of the endorphin in your brain is to stop you from feeling pain when you have an injury. So when you think about it, if you've ever really hurt yourself, like, you know, you fall and hit your hand or something, you look at your hand and your fingers are in 3 different directions. You're like, oh, I broke some bones that time. And it doesn't really hurt that much. And then you go to the doctor, they set it, and then, oh God, now the pain's kicking in. That's because of your endorphins are blocking that pain threshold. I don't know if you can see this, but let's put it up to the camera. Nope, camera's not taken. Hang on. It's not letting me show it, but I've got this huge scar on my thumb because years ago, 2001, I guess it was, I was doing some work with a table saw and I put my thumb into a table saw, which I would say don't do. So don't do that. But, you know, it slashed my thumb open. Didn't hurt at all. I grabbed it, put something on it to stop the bleeding, got to the emergency room, and they started sewing up, and then it hurt. Then it hurt a lot, and it hurt like hell for about a week. So anyway, that's one of the roles of your endorphins is to stop you from feeling pain. And when you think about it, evolutionarily, if you were in a fight with some wild animal, you know, you don't want to feel the pain every time it hurts you. You want to be able to keep fighting and get away before you start to deal with all that pain, right? It kind of helps you to get beyond the trauma before and into a safe place before you start dealing with it. There are 3 different opioid receptors. The first and last are most important. The mu opioid receptors, that's the main one that's going to be involved in pain and in addiction. It produces euphoria. It doesn't produce pain. It stops pain, produces that relaxed, good feeling you get with opiates. It also causes respiratory depression, so overdoses because of mu opioid receptors. You've got the deltas, which there are fewer of them in the brain. They're in similar places of the brain as the mus, but they're just not as strong. They don't have as much of an effect. The mus, by the way, are in all the spots I just talked about. They're in the brain stem, so that's what's going to stop your breathing. They're in the paraaqueductal gray matter, which is just gray matter next to the aqueduct. And that's pain modulation there. They're in the nucleus accumbens, and that's the euphoria. And they're in the cerebral cortex, and that's the relaxed, mellow, happy feeling you get with opiates after the rush. Kappa opioid receptors then are the ones for dynorphin. So they give the opposite effect as the opioid. So dysphoria, they make you feel unhappy, depressed, and anxious. So kappa opioid receptors then are the opposite. And also kind of a weird thing, there's this hallucinogen called Salvia divinorum. It's a plant, that's what it's called by the plant name. But I think you can still buy this, I'm not sure. But it activates these kappa opioid receptors and it gives you a really hallucinogenic effect, similar to like LSD or something. And they're not really they're not really sure why that happens yet. They're still kind of studying it. It's mostly legal. There's like 12 states that have outlawed it. Thank you, Sean. Which is kind of weird. They've known about it for a long time, and they've made every other opiate illegal. I'm not sure why that's still illegal. I mean, every other hallucinogen illegal. And all of these receptors are G protein coupled receptors, also called 7 transmembrane receptors, interact with G proteins, and they're all inhibitory. Effects that you get when you overstimulate them is pain relief, that euphoria or rush, and sedation. They talk about people being on the nod. If you're from the city, you've probably seen this. People who are just kind of like, they're asleep on their feet. They're kind of hanging there. They don't fall over, but they're kind of hanging there. Here's a guy who shot up in a stairwell, and you know he's gone past rush and he's kind of sleeping now. Oh, here's another video to watch. I think I've never done heroin, obviously. I've had opiates before, and they're good. It's a good thing they're not over the counter because they're so good. Believe me, so good you shouldn't do them, basically. But this is what I imagine it would be like, because it seems like a really good really good portrayal, let's say. Let this start, and then I'm going to pause it. So I don't know how many of you people have seen this movie, Train Spotting, but it's all about these.
Proceed directly to the intravenous injection of.
it's all about these heroin addicts in Glasgow or I forget, somewhere in Scotland anyway. And this guy, like, he just came off rehab. So his parents forced him to go into rehab. So he did, came off. He's been totally clean for a while. And he gets stressed out and he's like, the hell with it. I'm going to get high again. He goes back to the place where he gets his stuff. And here we go.
I'll proceed directly to the intravenous injection of hard drugs, please. As you wish, sir. As you wish.
And notice when he pushes it in, he pulls back a little bit to get blood into it. That way he knows that he's in a vein. Now push it. I see some chats coming up. We'll check them out afterward. Actually, he just falls into the floor. Just releases.
Just a perfect day. Drink sangria in the park.
So this song is Velvet Underground. Lou Reed, who is a heroin addict, and he's talking about his heroin basically.
Just a perfect day. Problems all left alone. Weekenders on our home. It's such fun. Just a perfect day.
I'm going to pause for a second. I'm getting a lot of chats. Does that mean that you can't see it or hear it? Have you seen
We
Breaking
can see
Bad?
it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Breaking Bad. We'll get to that next chapter. Will we get to that? The end of this clip is really important too. I like the way he knocks his head all the way down the stairs because he didn't feel it. That's the difference.
Someone else, someone who. Such a perfect day, you just keep me hanging on. You just keep me hanging on. Wake up! Come on, wake up! Just one.
So you see how he's breathing really heavy there. He was in respiratory depression, so he wasn't getting enough oxygen to his body. And they hit him with that naloxone, and it hit his brain. He went straight from being almost dead to being wide awake. And, you know, I knew a guy who was an anesthesiologist. He said, they really don't like when you do that.
Just watch your soul.
Mom and dad are not happy. Okay. I hate needless. I hate needless too. Oh, needles. Yeah. That's needles are not good. Dude, the heroin scenes from Breaking Bad are nuts. Heroin scenes? I think those are methamphetamine scenes. And we'll see some
No,
of
no. One of the characters gets addicted to heroin in the process of the show, and he loses control over not Walter, but Jesse, if you've
Uh-huh.
seen it. So it's like he becomes addicted
That's right.
with his girlfriend.
And his girlfriend wakes up and Walter's there and she's choking on her own vomit, right? And
Yeah.
he has a choice to roll her over and let her save his life, but he's like, she's getting in the way of business, and he let her die. Yeah, that was a good scene. You're right. Not safe for work. That means I'm going to look at it later because we're at work now, aren't we? Okay. Sean Matt Cole. It isn't that neat and clean, and they don't wake up that nicely. Christy, tell us about waking up a heroin addict who's in withdrawal.
You don't.
Because they go right from like almost dead to full withdrawal, right?
Oh, they're horrible.
Mm.
They're absolutely horrible. You can, what we usually have is 2 milligrams of Narcan in a pre-filled syringe, and we'll we'll give them 1 milligram as long as their respiratory drive kicks in.
Uh,
We'll leave it at that. We won't wake them up because they usually wake up fighting, and
Yeah.
we'll just put them back to sleep.
How do you put them back to sleep? With like a benzo or something?
No, we'll intubate them.
Oh, intubate them.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
we'll put lots of tubes and lots of holes.
So basically, you're going to titrate them up till they start to breathe, but not until they wake up.
Exactly, because most addicts, when you're taking away their high, they get really pissed off and they get violent. And I've been hit too many times in the back of a truck to
Yeah.
wake somebody up enough. I don't feel like fighting.
How many times have you saved the same person's life more than once in the same day?
Oh God, I over 20 years, I don't know.
Yeah.
We see people multiple times a day.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's really pathetic.
Did you notice a difference when fentanyl suddenly became available?
Well, working in different parts of the country, I've seen different trends.
Mm-hmm.
Down in Texas, we didn't see much heroin. We saw stuff like PCP and our prescription drugs.
Mhm.
People would mix things like that. Up here, I've seen a lot more heroin, fentanyl. I've dealt with carfentanil. Seen several of that, which is really scary because that shit's bad.
Yeah. That's even more potent than fentanyl.
Yeah, it'll kill an elephant.
Yeah.
And that's no joke.
Yeah.
We've seen heroin that's been mixed with formaldehyde and things like that.
Mm.
We've seen stuff that just we don't know what to do with because the opiates are cut with all kinds of stuff that our stuff does, our medications don't work with.
Yeah.
So somebody will be in arrest and it'll be an opiate overdose, but because it's been cut with something, then Narcan doesn't work.
And you don't know what it is, so you don't know how to counter it, or maybe it can't be countered. Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, let's see. Do I have anything else to talk about today? Okay, let's do this real quick, and then we'll call it a day. Looking at the different receptors and where they are and what they do. Let's just screen it there. Okay. So mu opioid receptors, the MORs, are what we're most interested in because that's where your addiction is, the nucleus accumbens and euphoria. It also stimulates the VTA directly. We'll talk about that next time, giving you euphoria as well. In the thalamus, it's there for your pain modulation. And in the RAS, it's going to cause relaxation. And then in the medulla, this is where you end up dying because of respiratory depression and vomiting. Again, the depression slowing down your breathing, vomiting. If you're laying on your back, it goes back into your lungs, you aspirate it, and you die from that. Paraaqueductal gray area and the dorsal horn. Dorsal horn, I believe that's in the spine. This is where you're getting your pain modulation. Okay, your mu opioid. See, there's a lot less distribution of the delta opioid. Shoot. Slight euphoria, some relaxation, and then the kappa is where you're getting dysphoria, pain, anxiety, depression. This is the opposite of the mu opioid effect. Okay, so that's about it for today. I mean, I don't really want to cover the whole chapter today because I want you to have a chance to read up on what we just went over. So if there are no questions, I'm going to call it a day at this point. Any questions? Any questions? Comments? Oh, they're leaving like rats leaving a sinking ship. Okay, guys. I will see you guys on Thursday. No, Wednesday. Have a great day.